Hey everyone, I've been talking Lithophanes the last couple of weeks. Um, next up, for next week, we're going to talk about the bird feeder setups that I've got and the 3D, how 3D printing has helped that. But this week I wanted to go back and talk about Lithophanes. Now, to refresh your memory, a lithophane looks like just a blob in some cases until you apply a backlight to it. Now, the way a lithophane works is everything that you consider to be dark is thicker than everything that's light. So the less material there is, the more light comes through. So that makes sense, right? If I want something to be darker, if I put more pieces of plastic between me and the light source, it becomes darker and darker. However, when you look at it with the naked eye, it doesn't look right because it's the reverse of what you expect. When you see an image, anything that's bright looks closer to you than anything that's dark. That's how, with a picture, we can make it look more three-dimensional by taking that flat image and doing what's called dodge and burn. But if you just do a darkening around the shape of the face, for example, it pulls the face out from the surrounding image even more than just having a good bokeh, a blurring of the background. It helps pull that third dimension out. And it's something that I do when I've done, for example, retouches on bodybuilding photographs by pulling in the details of the muscles, doing the dodge and burn on it so that the eye sees things further away or closer. You can pull those in, pull the detail as well as that contour back out and make that two-dimensional image look more three-dimensional. But what I wanted to talk about here is blending images with 3D printing. And there's two primary ways you can do that. Lithophanes is one. The other way is just making a front lit image. So instead of having it from the back, now as you look at the image, it should look exactly the way you want it to. Now, the advantage of having something like this is it's different. There aren't many people that are capable of doing this kind of work, but it doesn't have the same issues that a painting or a normal print would have. It's a little bit more sturdy. It can stand on its own, which means all you have to do is put it on a frame, or with the Lithophanes, create a frame that will allow it to hang on a window, and you've got something that is easy, it's portable. It's not as big as the type of prints that I like to do for people to put on their wall, but it does give you something that you can use. Now, in order for this to work, you need to understand 3D printing a little bit. And that is 3D printing prints in layers. Usually it's around 0.08 millimeters per layer. So there's a lot of layers that get put into place. When you're doing color, you either have to worry about how it's going to look with the light coming behind it or how it's going to look with the light reflecting off the front of it, which are very different ways of looking at the image and the way the colors are going to blend. If it's coming from behind, the colors have to blend their way forward. If it's coming from the front, it's going to look the way your naked eye would assume it to look. But again, you've got that reflective light going into the object, so it has to be done a little bit differently than if you were doing a painting, for example. Enter a program like HueForge, which honestly is the only one I've seen so far that does this. It allows you to do a couple of things. It allows you to visualize what you're going to do, and it tells you where your color changes are going to be based off of what you've done. So basically what you've got is you have a list of your colors. You put the colors onto the sliders at the bottom, the colors that you want to use, and you slide them up and down to get the effect that you want. I did a face, and it came out well using gold and another color. So not a flesh color, but gold. And remember, you're depending on which way you're going with it is how the light's going to interact with your print. When you do something that's backlit, it looks just like a normal lithophane. The colors look all wrong. It doesn't look anything like what you're going to see once it's backlit. It looks like a very weird impressionist painting of something. And that's where something like HueForge comes into play, because by setting it to lithophane and putting your colors in there and adjusting those sliders, you can visually see how that's going to impact your final product. Now, is it exact? It's close enough. It can't be exact because in order to be exact, it has to know your exact lighting, the color of the lighting that's hitting it, the intimate details of what light and how it interacts with the filaments that you're using. Some of that stuff you can set up, but some of them are just things that you need to kind of play with. And this is definitely more of an art than a science. So you put your image into HueForge, and then you play with the sliders. The sliders are going to determine, and there's a graphical display of where they're going to be as well, what layer they're going to show up in. And by manipulating those, you can manipulate the colors. For example, there are certain colors that you just may not be able to get when you're doing your prints. For example, I have my 8 colors. Right, and I've got white, black, red, blue, gold, purple, yellow, and green is currently what I have loaded into the printer. I can go up to 16 colors. I think I've mentioned this before. I've got a K2. It allows you to have 4 of these units, each with 4 colors in them. But I don't have pink, for example. I can get pink by manipulating the layers between red and white. By drawing those sliders up and down, I can get pink. How am I going to get it? Well, it's going to look weird if you look at it straight on, because the red's going to be first. The red's going to be a lower layer, and the white's going to be the top layer. That's going to allow the red to catch the light, but then use that white to blunt it a little bit so that I get my pink color. And the way I had it set up, it looked okay-ish in HueForge, but what came out is even darker than I anticipated. So you might do a little bit of hand manipulation after the fact. Now, how does this work, right? I've got this thing that I'm going to print. How is it going to work? When you do a lithophane, so we're going to do that because this is the more difficult of the two. When you're doing a straight front lit, it's much easier to manipulate the controls and get what you're expecting. But when you're doing a lithophane, there's a little bit of a difference to it. So remember we said that things that are darker are raised more. That gives you more material to work from. That said, when the thing's printing, it's printing a layer at a time, right? So let's take, for example, I'm sure everybody's seen this, but the beating heart emoji. That's the emoji of the heart with the 3 little lines off of each lobe of that heart. Those lines, as well as the heart itself, will be raised from the material, which means that the background material, let me describe my lamp and then we'll get into it. I bought a cube lamp off of Amazon, created a simple frame for the top and bottom that takes a 1 millimeter thick panel that slides in. That's 150 by 140 millimeters. Has a fixed bottom at it, so you just slide it in and drop it into place, and it won't slide out from the bottom. And onto that, I will put my lithophane. Now, my lithophane will be raised above that. So the first 12 layers of the material is going to be white. Everything above that, I can manipulate the color for. And again, because the heart is raised, anything that I do after layer 12 is going to impact everything that's raised. And that's where the trick comes in. Everything above that layer is going to be raised. So if I need to change a different color, but everything is the same height, it's going to cause an issue because you can't change the color on anything other than a layer basis. Now, that's not to say you can't use something that allows you to paint the object, but bear in mind, once you use, it's an either or. You're either going to paint everything or you're going to layer everything. Painting is an option, and painting, again, when you're looking at something that's front lit, painting works great. You can just paint right over the top the colors that you want if you've got them in your kit, and you're good to go. If you don't have them, then you have to have light manipulate the colors so that the pinks look pink, and if you don't have orange, you've got your yellow and your red, and it's making a good orange for you. That said, what we're doing here is we're manipulating at the layer basis. So if you have something that needs to be a different color at the end, you're going to have to make that taller than everything else. Bearing in mind that there is a sweet spot there. As I make things taller, that means more light isn't coming through, which means that whatever color I put on the top isn't going to be as bright. Solution to that is to use something like a lithophane maker that handles the majority of what you want. And then, knowing that you're going to have that back plate to it, in my case, I can manipulate each of those items to extrude them a little bit more or cut them back just a little bit, so that that top layer isn't as tall. I'll give you an example. Pull up the angel emoji. Looking at that emoji, again, it's a two-dimensional object. The halo is blue. The face is really easy to do, right? A little bit of yellow, a touch of red, just to give it that little bit of glow, and a little bit of we're manipulating the light. So we want it to be just a touch toward the orange side of the spectrum, and it works. But the halo isn't above everything else. So the halo is going to get that yellow. It's going to get that red. It's going to get that no matter what. And if I extend it above, now I've added an extra layer to it. I can add in a blue, and it does work. But because that one isn't as thick, I can manipulate it to work by thickening the halo itself. Take a different example. There is a emoji with a blush on both sides. I can't quite think of what it's called at this point. I think the eyes are closed on it, but it's got like a little rosy cheek on each side. that most likely is going to become a lithophane that is flat. All right. The face is not going to have anything raised on it. If I want those blush spots, I'm going to have to manipulate the image that's created to create those two circles, draw them a little bit further up so that I can manipulate the colors in them. Again, we're working our way up, but the problem's going to be on all of these is I've already got a background color. So you have to offset that background color some way. And the more layers you make, the darker things get. So it becomes a little bit difficult. That's how my beating hearts came out a little bit darker red, is because they're thicker than they would normally be, because I wanted to manipulate them a little bit differently. So there's a trade-off in there, and that's why I said a lot of this is more art than science. A lot of it is going to be trial and error of you printing these out and seeing what you think and then going back and manipulating them. Again, this is what you want to see, so there's not really a right or a wrong. If you're happy with the outcome, then you did it right. But again, bear in mind that anything that you're doing from the front is one way, and anything that you're going to do from the back is a completely different way. And like I said, when I wanted to get the pink heart, because I wanted because the red needed to be in the background, when you look at it in the light, it looks more white than anything else. You can barely make out the red that's in there because the light coming in is bouncing back a little bit. And that's what the issue is on the front lit ones, is even though you're seeing it from the front, you're still going to get a little bit of that back color as the light bounces into past some of the filament and bounces back out. So there's a little bit of manipulation there, but it's not as great as what you're going to see when you do things that are backlit. But a tool like HueForge will give you the ability to visualize what your final result's going to be. It will tell you at what layers to manipulate things for the item you're using. For the items I use, I've got that extra 12th layer to it, so I've got to manipulate things a little bit differently for that, because my final has more layers to it and may have more layers than the original did, even discounting those 12. All right, even if I take those first 12 layers out because of the backing, this may still be a little bit thicker. So at that point, I go by ratios. What ratio of layers is this color? And then manipulate my final that way. But again, once I'm done, I've got that lamp and I've got the framing that I've got in there, and I can just drop it right in, turn on the light, and I got my color lithophane that way. So that's what I got for you about lithophanes this week. It's getting to be marginally warmer here. We're going to get back over to some solar stuff as things go on. We'll do a recap report coming up. Like I said, next week we'll talk about what we can do for bird feeders and for our birds using 3D printing. And then we'll get back to what our solar setup looks like and what changes will happen to it this year. So that's what I got for you guys this week. I'll talk to you all next week.